Hi, this is the first set of videos for the guided notes for this course. We're going to talk about today is what is relation, and as you see on the screen, a relation is a correspondence between two sets of objects. Now, unlike concrete objects, like my desk or my computer I'm sitting at, in mathematics we're interested in talking about sets of numbers. But first we're actually going to use objects as we normally think about them, as things or people, to express this idea of relationship, and then we'll move over and talk about sets of numbers instead. In this video, we'll talk about mapping notations and some of the basic definitions. And then in the next video, we'll talk about ordered pairs and how the definitions translate to that. And then we'll talk about tables and algebraic equations in the video after that. So let's look at our first example. In this example, I always like to use something that's very familiar to students. Students take classes. So, example. We're going to set up two sets. Our first example, our set, is going to be X, and we're going to have a set of people. So we are going to have Jack, Jill, Paul, and Mary. And in mapping notation, we usually encircle the objects in a given set. And then set Y is going to be the set of classes that these people are going to be taking as a group. Or not as a group, but, different types of classes that are available for them to take. So let's just say math, science, music, and history. And again, we're going to encapsulate it in a circle or a square. And then to denote a relation between an object in X and an object in Y, we're going to draw an arrow. So, for example, if Jack is going to take a math course, we're going to draw an arrow from Jack to math. And then let's say he also takes a music class. Now I want to change the color here. Let's go to a dark blue. And Jill, let's say she is taking a math, a science, and a history course. I want to change the color again. Let's do a dark green. And Paul, in particular, is going to just take history. And then let's use red. And let's say Mary is taking music and math. So notice, for one, you don't have to color code this. I just wanted to show who was taking what a little bit more clearly. But even with the color coding, notice that this example of relation gets kind of chaotic and hard to see. But it's clear that Jack is taking these two classes, Jill is taking 3 different classes, Paul is taking 1 class, and Mary is taking 2 classes. The set of objects in X is called the domain. So think about domain in this. So let me change my color again. And domain then is the set of objects in X. And there's kind of an extra caveat, which have an arrow coming from them. So, coming from it, and so I know my handwriting, I'm sure, will get better as we write on the screen. The set of objects in X which has an arrow coming from it. So let me write that. And that. And so notice that everything in X, Jack, Jill, Paul, and Mary, all have arrows coming for it. Let's say I add an extra person, Jim. Jim is not in the domain because there is no arrow coming out of Jim. We say that Jim is undefined in this relation. And we'll talk about undefinedness later. Range, on the other hand, is very similar to domain, but instead of arrows coming out of X, we're going to think about arrows going into Y. And so the range is just the set of things in Y which an arrow is pointing to. So in this case, everything in Y, the math, the science, the music, the history, they're all have an arrow pointing to it. So the range is the set of objects in Y that has an arrow pointing to it. Arrow pointing to it. And so, again, everything in Y has an arrow pointing to it, but that's not necessarily always the case. Even though the book doesn't talk about it, I do like to talk about this. For example, we could have a course in, let's say, poli-sci, or political science. You notice that no one on the left-hand side has an arrow pointing to poli-science, so poli-science is not in the range of the relationship. So the domain is just going to be these objects, which have an arrow coming out of them, and the range is just going to be these objects that have an arrow coming into them. And so this is mapping notation. So in the next video, we're going to talk about how to turn mapping notation into ordered pairs. See you then.